I have been playing video games basically my whole life. The first game I remember playing is Donkey Kong Country on my sister's Game Boy Advance. Then I moved on to others like Super Mario Bros. 3, Mario Kart Double Dash, Mario Party. These kid-friendly Nintendo games were the extent of what I knew about video games for a long time. But around 2009, I started hearing about this other series that wasn't anything related to the Mario platformers and party games that I was familiar with. This series was an RPG, with its main selling point being its tactical gameplay and emphasis on story. This was Final Fantasy. My curiosity took me to Google, and one of the first results I saw when typing in Final Fantasy into the search bar was this image of a blonde spiky-haired dude with a sword that was as tall as him. Final Fantasy VII? Just how many of these games are there? I'll just check out this one. My first impressions upon beginning a new game weren't the greatest. Everyone had huge arms, the pre-rendered backgrounds made it hard to tell where I was going, and these new concepts of leveling up, managing a party, random encounters, turn-based battles took a bit to get used to. But my desire to find out why all the YouTubers I was watching at the time kept mentioning Final Fantasy kept me going. 30-minute play sessions turned into 1-hour ones, then 2-hour ones. Then it got to the point where I'd lose track of time so much that I had to keep the laptop I was playing the game on plugged in at all times. I was horrible at the game. I was dying left and right and constantly getting lost. But it was so different from anything else I had played. And I was loving it. Then, after many months, I beat Final Fantasy VII, and I was sad. I was sad that it was over. This was my first time experiencing the feeling of not wanting a game to end. Final Fantasy VII is very special to me. It holds the title of being the first RPG I ever played, the first non-Nintendo game I ever completed, and the first game to have engrossed me with its story, its world, its music, its characters. It single-handedly introduced me to a whole new world of gaming that took me down a path of trying out other games, like other Final Fantasies. This is how I got into the Mother series, why I played Chrono Trigger, Zelda. But no matter how great these games were, the interesting stories and worlds they crafted, none of them had Cloud, or Aerith, Sephiroth, Midgar. None of them were Final Fantasy VII. Although I consider Xenoblade Chronicles as my favorite game of all time, Final Fantasy VII is just so memorable and charming and important to me. That feeling I had playing it for the first time just couldn't be replicated. That is, until 2020, when a game came out that did something no other piece of media I could think of has ever done. It made me excited about something I had already experienced over 10 years ago. At E3 2005, the world got its first taste of what a Final Fantasy VII Remake could look like. The original game's visuals are of course very memorable, they have a certain charm to them, but this tech demo made fans yearn for a fully fledged remake of one of the most popular games of all time. Despite there being no confirmation that a remake was actually being worked on, it was bound to happen soon.
Now, 3 generations later, we were bringing that title back to the PlayStation.
Serious?
I'm happy to announce that the Square Enix will begin the PC release of the Final Fantasy VII exclusivity to PlayStation 4 this spring.
The PSX 2014 announcement came off as incredibly tone-deaf to those who were waiting for a remake announcement. It felt like Square knew what we wanted, but they were just ignoring us. I and many others were starting to lose hope. Until E3 2015, where we were treated to one of the greatest reveals of all time.
Now, many years ago, Square Enix released a groundbreaking title that went on to become one of the most beloved games in PlayStation and video game history. Tonight, I am proud to announce that by popular demand, we have a very special treat for everyone.
Long ago, we looked upon a foreboding sky. The memory of the star that threatened all burns eternal in our hearts.
Oh my God! Okay, it's happening. Everybody stay calm.
What's the
Everybody
procedure,
stay
everyone?
calm.
What's the procedure?
Stay calm.
Wait.
Everybody just calm down.
The reunion at hand may bring joy. It may bring fear. But let us embrace whatever it brings. For they are coming back. At last, the promise has been made.
The excitement I saw online over the announcement of the Final Fantasy VII Remake was just incredible. Some were hype as hell, while others were just straight up emotional and heartwarming. Our wishes were granted. Final Fantasy VII Remake was real. We now knew that it was being worked on, and all that was left was just waiting for it to come out.
I still don't see why we brought a Shinra soldier along. No way he'd throw all that away for us. What's his name, anyway?
Cloud Strife. And he says it's former soldier. Look, heavy security like this, you want a professional.
Before we knew it, we got our first look at the game in action. The frame rate looked a little choppy in some areas, and the turn-based combat was being ditched in favor of real-time combat. But I mean, I think that everyone can agree that this reimagined version of Midgar looked amazing.
Totally, in the top 10 or whatever. This is a classic good RPG. There's a reason it got so many people into the RPG genre during the PlayStation era. Like, PlayStation was inundated with so many great RPGs at that time. It was really a golden era, golden age of for the genre, and I really hope that they can tap into that. And I have to imagine that, like you, Johnny, I think they're going to aim for 2017.
Original director and remake producer Yoshinari Kitase explained that in order to replicate everything from the original game in the highest quality possible, without cutting content and also adding new elements, the game had to be spread over multiple entries.
This is crazy to say, but I want to give them the benefit of the doubt because I do understand that this game is very difficult to remake as far as keeping the scope of everything, and it's unknown whether they'll be adding more stuff to it, or if we're getting more of the some hints to the stuff that came afterward, like Crisis Core and Dirge of Cerberus and Advent Children and all of those games. It's very unclear, and there's so much they could do with this and make it either work or the worst thing that you can possibly imagine.
After all this news started coming out, people who were initially excited for this game, myself included, were starting to get a bit worried. Especially as the months went by and we heard nothing. The situation just seemed to be getting worse when it was announced that development was being transitioned as an in-house project at Square Enix. This was in 2017, over a year after the last trailer we got. It was clear that Final Fantasy VII Remake, like many other AAA games of that generation, was in development hell.
There were several opportunities Square could have talked about this game, including E3, PlayStation Experience 2016, as well as the Final Fantasy 30th Anniversary event, and I'm just hoping that they're working on the game in some fashion, because we only got one thing recently, and that was at the 30th Anniversary event, and it was just key art. What the hell is going on?
My biggest fear was that the game was going to come out and was going to be disappointing. There was just no way that a game going through this many issues could possibly turn out good. and especially wouldn't live up to the fans' unrealistic expectations. I had to accept that Final Fantasy VII Remake may not be the game that I had been wishing for all those years, and all I was hoping for was a sign, something, anything that would prove me wrong.
Halt! Hands up!
Have fun.
I'm here for you, to help take the load off your shoulders!
I was proved wrong. The State of Play trailer marked the beginning of a plethora of new information regarding the remake in the coming months, including an extended look at the game at E3 2019. We were so happy to see all of this new footage and gameplay because it showed us that the wait was worth it.
These sewer rats appear to call themselves Avalanche, sir.
This right here is my favorite thing ever. In the history of forever. I think about this every day. I think about this all night long. I stay awake, not sleeping, because I'm thinking about this.
Dude, the music! The music is great.
Tifa! Tifa! She looks great. She looks great. Tifa looks great.
This is freaking awesome!
Final Fantasy VII Remake seemed like a game that shouldn't even exist in the first place. The amount of effort that was being put into this game was immaculate, and that passion permeated through every trailer up until the game's launch. This was incredible. While there were still a few things to be worried about, such as the gameplay and story, the prevailing opinion was that this game wasn't going to disappoint.
You bastard! Hold on to that hatred.
We got trailer after trailer showing new things each and every single time, always confirming the same release date of March 3rd. By the time the Game Awards trailer was released, the game was only 4 months away. In 4 months, the game was finally going to be in our hands. Yeah, like that was gonna happen. So the game got delayed, but only by a month, with the new release date being April 10th, 2020. To make up for the added wait time, we were not only treated to the theme song trailer on the 23rd anniversary of the original game, but Square Enix also released the long-rumored demo of the game on March 1st, giving many people their first hands-on experience with Final Fantasy VII Remake.
I'm ascending.
Wow. Okay, I smiled.
Yeah, the demo was good. It was very good, and any small worries that I had up to that point were eased after I played it. I loved what they were doing with the characters and the combats, not to mention that it looked like absolute bliss. If this was only a taste of what the rest of the game would look like, this could potentially be a contender for one of my favorite games of all time. Sure, I still knew it was only going to cover Midgar, so it wasn't quite what I had wished for. And after waiting an excruciatingly long 5 weeks after the demo for it to come out and finally getting to play it, it took me 3 weeks to finish it, and I concluded that Final Fantasy VII Remake did not meet my expectations. It surpassed them. I mean, what can I say? If the introduction to this video didn't make it obvious enough, I absolutely loved Final Fantasy VII Remake. From just the opening moments of the original game, the bombing of Reactor 1, the fight against the Scorpion Sentinel, meeting Aerith for the first time, to even the title drop, I knew this was going to be a very special game. I was delighted to see just how well crafted and deep Remake's combat really is. It's like they literally took the turn-based gameplay of the original game and directly translated it to real-time combat. The materia system is back, and it's as fun as ever collecting new ones and experimenting with them. Thankfully this time they don't add any negative effects to your character, so I had no problem trying them all out. The fighting itself is fast-paced, engaging, and most importantly, fun. It's also quite challenging. Normal mode in Final Fantasy VII Remake is not something I would recommend to people who have never played this type of game. I have quite a bit of experience with RPGs, and I died a handful of times throughout my first playthrough. This game doesn't hold your hand, and despite its hack and slash nature, you can't get away with just mashing buttons. The ATB system from classic Final Fantasy games is back, preventing you from just spamming abilities and items, so you need to strategically think about when and how to use your ATB. Improper use of those valuable ATB bars can be the difference between victory and defeat. And despite there being only 4 playable party members in this game, they are all fun to play as and bring their own unique battle mechanics. Cloud hits really hard with his sword, and his Punisher mode is a godsend for physical encounters. Barret excels at long range combat, and his high HP and defense let him take a lot of hits. Tifa focuses on close range combat with her martial arts combos, which if used correctly can really rack up the damage. Aside from Cloud, she was personally my favorite character to use, and there's no better character to give your offensive magic materia to than Aerith, though she was personally my least favorite character to use only because her abilities focus more on support than actually attacking enemies. You can switch between characters in battle, issue commands, and it all adds up to a combat system that never gets dull in my opinion. Except for the few times where the camera gets a little crazy and you have to fight airborne enemies. Yeah, these are admittedly pretty bad, and hopefully they're fixed by the time that part 2 comes out. Of course, there's many ways to make combat easier for yourself. I already mentioned materia, and just like the original game, most materia can be leveled up. Fire materia can be leveled up to Fyra, which eventually levels up into Firaga. There's a few summon materia that can aid you in battle, which you can find throughout the world or by completing these VR missions. Chadley here is a new character for this game, who will sell you some really good materia in exchange for collecting battle data for him. He also has this VR headset where you can participate in battles against the summons, which I mentioned earlier. Defeating these nets you their respective summon materia. These are optional battles that you can partake in, of course, and the game is filled with them. There's Coliseum battles you can participate in chapters 9 and 14, and more VR battles in chapters 16 and 17. Chapter 17 houses the most difficult of these VR battles, with some of them even being locked behind hard mode. If you can manage to complete all of these, you seriously deserve a medal. Which is why it's important to do things like level up your characters, materia, and weapons. Upgrading weapons can give you a variety of added perks such as added strength or new slots to fit more materia. This is a really cool mechanic since it makes every weapon, even the early game ones, viable up to the end game. So if you really wanted to, you can use the Buster Sword up to the final boss if you like the look of that weapon. Or even the Nail Bat. I won't judge. So the gameplay immediately hooked me, and it's arguably the best part of the game aside from, of course, the game's main selling point. Midgar has never looked better than it does in Final Fantasy VII Remake. Despite this being the only major locale in this game, Square Enix made damn sure to give this city the upgrade it deserved. Not only does it look visually stunning, but it feels alive. Running through the alleyways of the Sector 7 slums, for example, nearly every NPC has something to say about the current situation. There are a lot of compromises, of course. This game was originally built with the PS4 hardware, including all of its limits. Some textures look really muddy, and the NPCs honestly look like they were ripped straight out of a PlayStation 2 game. Also, while some of the skyboxes and backgrounds can look really nice, a lot of them look out of place. Like these buildings are obviously just a JPEG, and they unfortunately stick out for the wrong reasons. Everything else though, looks so beautiful. When the lighting works as it should, it looks amazing. And the character models of the main characters are top notch. Never before have we seen Cloud's pores in this much detail. For being restricted to the PlayStation 4, this game is a technical marvel. And of course, I can't ignore the soundtrack. The original game's soundtrack has some of my favorite video game music of all time, and the remake's updated arrangements are nothing short of outstanding. Music in the original game was so important of conveying the mood and tone of the scenes, because the characters, well, they couldn't really convey it, look at them, and there was no voice acting. And the composers of Remake's soundtrack absolutely knew that. I knew that I was in for something great when I first got to the sequence of Cloud escaping the Shinra guards in Sector 8. The soundtrack is incredibly dynamic, always changing and morphing to match whatever's on screen, and they just sound so good. The bombing mission, Tifa's theme, the battle music goes through so many different changes throughout the game, and it always sounds fresh and new. There's not really a lot of times where the exact composition of a song is reused, and the highlight in the soundtrack for me was Genova. The original Genova theme is not just my favorite song in the original game, it's one of my favorite songs, period. I never get tired of it. And in the remake, listening to this slow, ominous rendition of the song slowly build up to something that sounded more familiar, I really have no words to describe the emotions I was feeling during that sequence. I loved it.
You okay? Nothing personal.
I'm confident in saying that the Final Fantasy VII Remake soundtrack is my favorite soundtrack of all time. Not including the story and characters, which I'll talk about at the end. I basically mentioned everything that I loved in this game. The battle system, the visuals, the music, but there are quite a few things that I didn't like, that's for sure. I didn't think much of the level design on my first playthrough. It was alright, nothing amazing. You're pretty much just running through linear corridors the whole game. But on repeat playthroughs, especially when I had to replay certain chapters multiple times for certain trophies, it got pretty boring running through some of those areas again, especially when this was required to complete some of the side quests. I am not that big of a fan of the side quests in this game. There's only a little over 20 of them and can be found in chapters 3, 8, 9, and 14, but I really only found the ones in chapter 9 to be interesting. If they cut out about 1 or 2 of them in each of the other chapters, I think that it would have been much better. Especially in chapter 14, where the game comes to a screeching halt if you decide to do all the side quests. There's 9 of them in this chapter, and most of them amount to boring fetch quests that have you running through each of the sectors, over and over and over again. But overall, I don't think this game really needed side quests. Midgar was already a very linear section in the original game with no side quests. They probably felt that they had to justify the game's price by making it longer. But in my opinion, it only hurt the remake in the long run. Which is a shame, because there's a lot of good items and weapons that are locked behind these side quests. So if I want to obtain those rewards, I have to complete the side quests on repeat playthroughs. They're padding to the highest degree, and padding can unfortunately be found through the rest of the game as well. I mean, I understand that Midgar was only like 5 hours in the original game, so they had to do something to make it longer. But did we really have to run through the collapsed expressway and the sewers 2 times in the story? Make that 3 times or more if you're doing the side quests. And areas in the original game that could be completed in a few minutes have now been converted into full-out dungeons that take about an hour. This is a completely separate topic in and of itself, but I really hate how developers nowadays feel like they need to justify a game's price by making the game artificially longer. It just makes it more monotonous when you want to replay it. I'd rather have a shorter game filled with only exciting moments than a longer game filled with a bunch of boring moments. So as a game, Final Fantasy VII Remake is obviously not perfect, but those flaws that I pointed out were nowhere near enough to bring down the whole experience for me. When a game can make me feel like a kid again, and make me not able to stop thinking about so many of those amazing moments over a year after it's come out, all those issues that I mentioned don't matter. If Remake was great as a game, but fell on its face in regards to the characters and the story, I probably wouldn't have been compelled to make this video in the first place, and it probably wouldn't have left much of an impact on me. What I was really curious to see was how modern Square would handle these characters and this world and this story after, let's face it, not doing a great job of it in almost everything that came out after the original game. If I played this game and I didn't like how the characters were acting or how the story was playing out in this episodic nature, that would have been it for me. I would have written off Remake as a failure, because those are the elements that made me fall in love with Final Fantasy VII in the first place. If they mess those up, what's the point? I'll just go play something else. But I think that the constant grin I had on my face spoke for itself. After mismanaging this universe for so long, it felt like the folks over at Square actually gave a shit. By the way, this is basically where the story spoilers start, so if you have any interest in playing this game, and if you've actually made it this far in the video in the first place, please click away now. I don't want to be the person to ruin those amazing moments for you. especially if you've played and loved the original game like so many others. For so many years, it felt like Square had misremembered what made the characters in Final Fantasy VII so great and memorable. The characters of Cloud and Aerith, for example, had been stripped away of a lot of their, well, character in many of the compilation projects like Advent Children and Crisis Core. As soon as I saw Cloud give that smirk in the remake when he's complimented by Jessie, I could tell that the team that worked on this game knows how these characters are supposed to act. Cloud is still very much an edgelord for most of the game, but that doesn't make up his whole character. He puts on that cool guy persona to impress others because really, Cloud's kind of a dork. In this game, he acts very much like a 20-year-old man with the mind of a 16-year-old. He lets his guard down a few times, which shows that, yeah, this guy isn't such an asshole after all. And he has so many awkward moments that, admittedly, make me cringe a bit, but for the right reasons. And he has actual character growth, slowly warming up to the people around him and not being afraid to show that, yeah, he does care. I feel that Cloud in Remake is a natural evolution of his character in the original game. And that can basically be said for every character in this game. Barrett, for example, is also a big fan of the tough guy act, but in reality, he's just a lovable teddy bear who wants to look out for his friends. And he too also slowly warms up to Cloud as the game progresses. Aerith probably got the best upgrade. I feel like in the original game, a lot of people forget that Aerith was a weird girl. She wasn't perfect, and while being kind was a big part of her character, she was also very snarky and sarcastic, traits that were later forgotten about and ignored in favor of basically making her a saint. She's pretty much the opposite of Cloud. She's not afraid to show her quirkiness, and she's just hilarious.
I'm not some princess who needs to be coddled. Shit.
Aerith is easily the most enjoyable character to watch, and Tifa is, well, she's Tifa. She's a badass, a really close friend of Cloud's, and displays a wide range of emotions throughout the whole game. Tifa goes through quite a bit during the Midgar arc of Final Fantasy VII, and I think the remake really highlights that. Those moments where she feels powerless in the current situation and when Sector 7 is destroyed are really effective. And her relationship with the rest of the party is really enjoyable to see. She's just a great character, what can I say? And Red the 13th is just the most lovable goofball.
I mean, ain't you a Shinra lab rat or dog?
I'm not a rat dog.
And the supporting cast is great as well. The Avalanche members got the screen time they deserved. In the original game, they were sort of just there. Now I actually care about them. Especially Jessie. She gets the most attention since she has a crush on Cloud and is not at all subtle about it. Some may find her a little annoying and I can understand that, but not me. I loved her. Same with Biggs and Wedge. Their interactions, especially in Chapter 4, are some of the highlights of the game for me. And of course there's others like Shinra themselves, who may not have a lot of screen time but certainly leave an impact. And Hojo man, I really like how they're building him up to be the most despicable asshole in this series. His design, the way he talks, it's all perfectly unsettling.
Did you really think we'd leave such a precious specimen to rot in the gutter? We collected and cataloged every last bit of her. Hair, skin, organs, every fragment of every bone. As breathtaking in death as in life. As you, my dear. Ifalna was elegance, right down to her cellular structure.
There's also quite a bit of new characters here. There's Marl, the landlady in Sector 7, she's pretty cool. The Wall Market trio of Chocobo Sam, Madame M, and Andrea are all great as well. Speaking of Wall Market, there's Don Corneo. I don't like him, and that's the point. Really, the only characters that I didn't like were Roche and Leslie, for different reasons. Roche was criminally underutilized, and for how much he appeared in the trailers up to the game's launch, I thought that he was going to have a much bigger presence. He's batshit insane, and I love him for that. I just wish that I saw more of him. And Leslie is just... Okay, I think that a lot of my negative feelings towards Leslie stem from the fact that his character arc is kinda shoehorned in that part in Chapter 14 where you're revisiting the sewers, and it's just... You're revisiting an area you already went through, and his story just kind of brings the story to a screeching halt right before you're about to go save Aerith in the climax of the game, and it's just... I'm sure he'll appear in Part 2, I just hope that they handle his character better. On a more positive note, the voice acting. It's really great. There's not really a single bad performance that I can recall off the top of my head. The voice actors for Cloud, Tifa, and Aerith are all fantastic. And Barrett's voice actor in particular really brings his character to life. He's got that gruff Mr. T voice that just makes his lines all the more enjoyable to hear.
Hey guys, you know, these fans are really loud and
You chickening out?
Hell no! I'm just worried that your pony ass is gonna get blown off the side and shit.
The characters in this game are amazing, to say the least. They're consistent enough with their original versions, and the voice acting is just the cherry on top. And there's so many moments in this game that are just fan service overload. Like the part where you have to simultaneously use the switches in Chapter 7, the return of the squats minigame in Chapter 9, oh my god, Chapter 9. Easily the best chapter in the whole game. Wall Market is a great area to explore, and it's full of references and callbacks to the original game. Like the boss fight against the Hell House, the side quest involving the sauce.
The sauce.
And of course, the Honeybee Inn sequence. They took this optional area from the original game and cranked it up to goddamn 100. It's one of the most memorable and hilarious sequences I've ever seen in a video game. And the payoff is seeing Cloud in a dress. 10 out of 10. And I can't neglect this scene.
Wait!
The fight atop the Sector 7 pillar, getting to explore one of the upper plates, the fight against Reno in the church, the side quest that has you fight a freaking Tonberry, that VR sequence in the Shinra building, the motorcycle segments in Chapter 4 and 18, the fight against Rufus.
Another day, another struggle. Climbing stairs, so much trouble.
There were just so many great moments in this game, and I was smiling like a goddamn idiot throughout the whole thing. They may not mean a lot to someone jumping into Final Fantasy VII for the first time, but they meant everything to a Final Fantasy VII fan like me. And with that, I think the last thing that I want to look at is easily the most controversial aspect of this game, the story. I'm going to assume that most of you watching are at least familiar with the setup of Final Fantasy VII's story. What I mainly want to talk about is the changes that Remake brought to the table. Now, when the developers said that they were going to expand on the plot of the original game, what I had in mind was that they were just going to elaborate on some of the aspects that were less developed in the original game. What I didn't expect, and I think that nobody expected, was for them to straight up change certain aspects of the original story, which is where these guys come in. These were not in the original game. And to those who did play the original, it's pretty easy to notice that they only show up when the story starts to deviate. Cloud's about to kill Reno in the church? Ghosts. Cloud is kicked out of the Mako Reactor 5 mission? Ghosts. Tifa is about to prevent the Sector 7 plate from collapsing? Ghosts. Barrett getting fucking stabbed? Ghosts. So of course people were like,
why are you the way that you are? Honestly, every time I try to do something fun or exciting, you make it not that way.
And admittedly, I was in that camp as well. I thought that these things were dumb, and to a certain extent, I still think that they are. This is supposed to be a remake, why are things changing? Just to introduce this new element that's probably going to have a disappointing payoff in the end? Well, no. It's time that I acknowledge the elephant in the room that I have been blatantly ignoring up to this point, Sephiroth. In the original game, Sephiroth does not show up at any point in the Midgar section, just his sword sticking out of the president's back. In the remake, we see him as soon as Chapter 2, and technically, his presence can be felt from the opening credits, and he shows up a lot throughout the game. This, in conjunction with the ghosts, had me very worried about how the story was going to play out. Until Chapters 17 and specifically 18, where it's not explicitly mentioned, but it's heavily hinted at that this Sephiroth is not the Sephiroth from the original Final Fantasy VII. This is a Sephiroth who somehow knows what's going to happen in the story, and has been altering various events to his own benefit. This is why Remake frequently tends to deviate from the original game's story, and these ghosts are literal arbiters of fate sent by the planet to undo Sephiroth's meddling. Why is Cloud suddenly seeing visions of the future like the reunion and even Aerith's death? Well, it's Sephiroth. Whatever he's been doing throughout the game, it's to manipulate the party and lead them to do his bidding for him, killing the Whispers, which they do at the end of this game. Now, there's really nothing stopping Sephiroth from changing the events of Final Fantasy VII. Anything can happen at this point, evidenced by scenes showing Zack Fair alive in what's presumably an alternate timeline that, we know, will eventually cross into Cloud & Company's own timeline. After all of that mindfuckery and the text, "The unknown journey will continue," appeared on screen, I was at a loss for words. This ending is very controversial, and it's easy to see why. People expected a beat-by-beat remake of the original game's story, Not an ending and premise as open-ended as this. There's really two camps, people who hate it and people who love it. Do I really have to say it? I love it. I absolutely love it. Was I initially a little disappointed that this meant we weren't going to get an exact retelling of the original game's story? Yeah, of course I was. Final Fantasy VII Remake was advertised as a remake. A remake with maybe a few changes here and there, but not to this extent. And I can completely understand why people may not be happy with the direction that the remake series is headed in now. And you know, in a perfect world we would have both versions. We'd have the remake as we got it, and a remake that follows the original game exactly. But after thinking about it some more, and thinking about the implications that that ending has on the future parts of this series, I can't possibly be mad at it. Final Fantasy VII Remake has shown me that this team knows what they're doing, and that they care. I don't think I'm ever going to have a gaming experience quite like this ever again. From the new twists, to the nostalgic callbacks, to the much more subtle nuances that only die-hard fans of the original game would pick up, the characters, the combats, the music, the spirit of FF7, the reason why I love the original game so much, is still there. And if the rest of this series is given this same level of care, then I have nothing to worry about. If anything, I have to thank the team at Square for making me excited for a game that I played so many years ago. It's a wonderful time to live in, where we can be excited for Final Fantasy VII again. I'm personally glad now that this game was split up into multiple parts. Yeah, that means that I'm gonna have to drop $60 each time that a new part comes out, and I'm not looking forward to that. Oh shit, it's $70 now? Jesus Christ. But if this means that we can keep talking about this game for years to come, whether it turns out to be a masterpiece or a complete train wreck, I'm here for the whole ride, man. No other game that I have played has left this big of an impact on me. And with all of the reactions and discussions and speculation that I've seen online, I'm so happy to see that I'm not alone.
Bloody and